Happy 50th anniversary, Pax Christi, USA. I'm Sister Annie Killian from the leadership team of the Young Adult Caucus. I'm sorry not to be with you in person this weekend. The COVID-19 pandemic continues, but I'm grateful for the opportunity to share the thoughts I prepared for the intergenerational conversation. As someone new to Pax Christi, I'm still learning much of the movement's history. I share my personal history with you today, my own sacred story of becoming a peacemaker, in the hopes that it resonates with some of you as you think back to your beginnings in the peace movement. As a millennial, I came to political consciousness in the post-9/11 world. I entered high school in 2003, the year the US invaded Iraq. I don't quite remember how we talked about the invasion in school or at home, but I know that I felt we were being lied to. It seemed to me that everyone knew we were being lied to, yet we were powerless to stop the war from happening. I remember a day in US history class when we studied the Vietnam War. I had to leave the room. I literally walked out of class in anguish. It seemed to me this country, our leaders, had learned nothing from this very recent history. They were repeating the same failures of moral judgment. And it meant my generation would inherit a huge, complicated mess. We had blood on our hands. In college, I encountered the Catholic peace movement through peacemakers like Mark and Luce Colville of Amistad House, the Catholic worker in New Haven, Connecticut, Stephen Kobesa, a conscientious objector and plowshares activist, and his wife, Anne Somsel. I admired these folks for speaking the truth about the intersection of militarism, consumerism, and US imperialism. Even more, I respected them for bearing witness with their lives to Jesus's way of nonviolence. Eventually, the desire to live nonviolently and work for peace through justice led me to vowed religious life with the Dominican Sisters of Peace. Many of our sisters and associates in the larger Dominican family have been involved with Pax Christi over the years, working to abolish the death penalty, care for creation, close the School of the Americas, ban nuclear arms, accompany migrants, and liberate women and all who suffer discrimination, marginalization, or violence based on their gender or sexuality. In the 1990s, many congregations of women religious, including my own, began examining the ways they have perpetuated racism and white supremacy, as Professor Shannon D. Williams' research details. Like Pax Christi, these congregations initiated transformative processes to address our complicity in systemic racism and to become more clearly anti-racist and intercultural. I also admired Catholic sisters for speaking the truth in an institutional church that too often denied their ministerial gifts, prophetic voices, and courageous leadership. The anti-racism initiatives we've begun are a necessary start, but the year 2020 made it clear how much more we have to do on the connection between racism, white nationalism, and policing, as Father Brian Massengale exhorted us last year. I'm still haunted by the racially coded language critical of Black Lives Matter protests after the murder of George Floyd, just as I remain disturbed by footage of armed white nationalists storming the Capitol on January 6, 2021. When I found myself in a spiritual impasse after the assault on the Capitol, I connected with Pax Christi. One of our sisters alerted me to the Young Adult Caucus's virtual Lenten retreat that March. Organized by Michelle Sherman, Bob Shine, Brian Ashmanicus, and Lauren Bailey, the theme was based on Pope Francis's new book, Let Us Dream. The retreat opened with a penitential rite, that answered my deep hunger for truth-telling and lament around the entrenched systemic injustices in our church and world. Our prayer named the sins of white supremacy and racism, queer and transphobia, patriarchy and gender-based violence, ableism, classism, and the destruction of Earth. Then we recalled the dangerous memory of Jesus's all-inclusive love and welcome table. The prayer brought me consolation and a spark of recognition. Here was a community practicing solidarity and building a culture of encounter, as Pope Francis envisions for us. I experienced during that retreat Pax Christi's intersectional approach to peacemaking with justice. And I believe if our movement is to be deemed credible by young people and our oppressed neighbors, we must remain faithful to this intersectional lens and bring it to bear on what seems to me to be the greatest challenge to peacemaking in this country today: racialized policing and mass incarceration. The white power structure in the US celebrates the civil rights movement as if 1960s legislation brought racism to an end. In our schools, our children watch videos of Black activists knocked down by fire hoses and bitten by police dogs. They're taught to admire the protesters' courage and self-sacrifice, but they're not asked to critique police violence then or now as it still manifests. The civil rights movement may have won Black folks the right to vote, a right that's now being eroded, but it didn't ensure that people of color in this nation could live in peace without fear of violence. In fact, after civil rights, the police became more militarized, their use of force more deadly. In addition to efforts for global disarmament and conflict resolution, we need to create safe communities at the local level if we are to build genuine and lasting peace. The guns flooding our streets today stoke the culture of fear and mistrust that Pope Francis identifies in Fratelli Tutti as the opposite of a culture of encounter. Just last week, where I live in South Bend, Indiana, the police killed Dante Cottrell, a Black resident experiencing a mental health crisis. Nearly a dozen white officers with long guns and a SWAT team shot Dante down in front of his mother and killed him. In light of endemic local violence, I ask you, will Pax Christi pray, study, and act to ensure that armed police aren't the first responders in a medical crisis? I think the nexus of policing, gun violence, and white nationalism must be at the forefront of Pax Christi's prayer, study, and action going forward. I hope we engage further with Black Lives Matter on defunding the police, civilianizing public safety, abolishing prisons, and investing in restorative justice alternatives. As Pope Francis wrote in Let Us Dream, there is a real need for peacemakers prepared to work boldly and creatively to initiate processes of healing and renewed encounter. Encounter is at the heart of this intersectional work, responding not only to global crises, but local instances of violence. And this work must be undertaken in community, in relationship with those most marginalized and affected by oppression. That is what solidarity looks like. 50 years on, I think Pax Christi can affirm that we want real peace. But doing so will take new, bold, creative, relational work, the kind of work Pope Francis so urgently calls us to undertake. Thank you.